Did the Jacksonville Jaguars panic in free agency and add talent that they could have gotten in the draft for a lot less money? We'll discuss that and more here today on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Thank you for joining me here today on Locked On Jaguars. I am Tony Wiggins, the host of Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. And we thank you for making us your first listen. Slide on over to the YouTube page. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to Locked On Jaguars, and then hit that bell so you receive notifications each and every time we drop an episode. And wherever you get your audio podcast, make sure you tap into that location also so you don't miss a chance to hear the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. What is going on, man? Let me give you the rundown for today. Did the Jaguars trust themselves to choose veterans to pay at critical positions and positions of need because, well, they don't feel comfortable with themselves in the draft process? That's something that has come up a few times when I've talked to folks. So we're going to broach that subject a little bit. Is it smart to do what they did, or are they playing scared? And what I mean by that is, are these decisions being made in the best interest of the team long term, or are these decisions being made in the best interest of the people who are running the team short term? And what I mean by that is, I think it's very critical that you build your team through the draft the way the Jaguars said that they were going to do it last year, but to not totally ignore free agency the way that they seemingly did last year. It seems like Trent Baalke loves to go to the clearance rack to get what he needs, and he trusts that more than he trusts paying a lot of money for a few good players, and he also trusts it more than his ability to win in the draft outside of the first round. So we'll do that, and then we'll talk about Eric Armstead's value, and we'll hear from him. He has a podcast on Third and Long at Title League. It's the Title League podcast, and got a couple of minutes from Eric Armstead. I think he's a real good guy, and I'll let his voice speak for itself. So courtesy of Third and Long and Title League. But first, trusting vets over youth. It's not necessarily a bad thing in certain situations, but you've heard over the years from so many people that you build your team through the draft and you supplement your team through free agency. Well, the Jaguars, like, if you remember that, I always use this analogy. If somebody says, do you like, what's your favorite condiment? And you say it's mayo, and they say, oh, that means you don't like ketchup and mustard. That's not true. So there's a way you can be really, really extreme with everything that you do. And I think the Jaguars were a little bit extreme in 2023 in the offseason by saying, look, we have our team built. We're a draft and develop ball club. I think they tried to build on winning those 11 games, getting hot down the stretch with a bunch of young guys. And I really felt that they felt, and I understand the philosophy. I felt that what they did last year was say, you know what? These guys are just going to progress and they're going to continue to grow. We're going to be healthy, and we'll add a little bit and we'll build some depth and we'll raise the floor of the team. Well, they got off to a hot start, ended up with the exact same record at 9-8, but they didn't make the playoffs this year like they did last year. It was funny. The season was, they played the same team, the Tennessee Titans, with just about the same stuff, at least for them, on the table. And the tables turned. They had a hot start last year, of course, and then they lost a lot of games down the stretch. So now comes this year. They said, we're not doing that again. Everybody applauded it, and we're super, super happy that they decided not to do it again. But did they go overboard by adding a number of players as opposed to maybe adding one or two big-time players and then still using the draft, especially the first and second round, to go get guys and plug them in as surefire starters. The reason I brought this up was because it seems like everywhere that they added a player in free agency, the draft is strong at those positions. And normally you don't see teams do that. In fact, the market usually dictates, for instance, there was a lot of movement with running backs. Well, the draft doesn't have a lot of running backs in it, right? That people believe can make a tremendous impact. You got some guys that people are talking about going late second round, maybe early third. But even in those later rounds, it's not the numbers, the sheer numbers that it usually is. So that was reflected this year in what teams did in free agency, right? You notice outside of the big time players, there wasn't a whole bunch of movement for positions like defensive tackle. There wasn't a whole bunch of movement for wide receivers. You had guys that were free agents like Hollywood Brown. He signed another 1-year deal, right? So it's not as if teams really had a lot of movement, and you never really get like a one alpha guy as a free agent. Sometimes you do, like Tyreek Hill, who wasn't a free agent, but he got traded a couple of years ago. You didn't see a whole bunch of high end corner movement either. L'Jarius Sneed obviously got traded to the Titans, but teams around the league appear to be a little bit reluctant to go add veterans at these strong positions in the draft. I'm going to talk about this in segment 2. I'm going to give you the reasons why I think the Jaguars. I'm going to give you the reasons why they could have done it, but I'm going to give you also the reasons why I think they did it. And what I mean by did it, I think they did what other teams wouldn't have done. They did what a lot of teams wouldn't have done. They added players and veteran players. They added them at positions that are super, super strong in the draft. And the Jaguars are picking right smack in the middle of these rounds. So you wonder, man, like, why on earth did they do that? Are they afraid? Do they need to address multiple positions? Are they making up for last year? I think it's a little bit of that. Smart or scared? That's the question that I'll ask in segment 2. I think it's a little bit of fear. I also think it's a little bit of CYA. And you all know exactly what I mean by CYA. Cover your you know what. And all of that leads me to think that ain't nobody trying to win a Super Bowl, man. People just trying to make the playoffs and have a good showing so they can continue on their journey. So we'll discuss all of that here on Locked On Jaguars. I'll answer the question smart or scared in segment 2, and I'll do it in just a second on Locked On Jaguars. After I tell you guys about FanDuel. That's right. FanDuel, you need to say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Now, we're down to the Sweet 16, so you've seen the teams. They've gotten all greased up. Now you can really focus in on those matchups. And right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, and you can even pick who's going to win it all. Good luck with that. Somebody was screaming Duke at me today, so we'll just have to see. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. It's FanDuel.com/lockedon, LOCKEDON. All right, second segment here on Locked On Jaguars. We'll hear a little bit from Eric Armstead from his podcast on called Third and Long at the Title League podcast with Eric Armstead. We'll definitely hear from him in segment 3, and I think you're going to be super, super impressed with Eric Armstead. I think you're going to be super, super impressed with him. And everybody keeps saying it reminds me of Calais, a little bit, but I don't want to put that on him as much as I really want Eric Armstead to be able to have his own identity. You don't want to have him have to live up to the mayor of Jacksonville, but it's just that they have the same build, the same height. He's coming to Jacksonville sort of at around the same time in the career of Calais Campbell. So there's a lot of similarities, between the two, but we need to make AA have his own thing. That's double A, right? A squared. Eric Armstead. We're gonna figure out a nickname for him too. Maybe he just wants to be called Eric. But he's one of those vets that the Jaguars went out and got. And he's actually a signing that I really, really like. I don't dislike any of the signings. I love Mitch Morse because it was absolutely necessary. I like Darnell Savage. I do. I'm always weary when you go and this must be a scouting thing here. This must be inside information, right? That whatever beat they had on him, that the Packers just misused him. And Joe Barry, I know he ain't the favorite. He's not nobody's favorite up in Green Bay, or maybe he did misuse him and miscast him. But this is some super good scouting if this works out, because now Darnell Savage will be doing something that he hasn't really done a whole bunch of, and that's be a slot corner in the National Football League. But he certainly has the athleticism, the build, and somebody must have looked at him and said, you know what, that's where he needed to be playing, and they were making a mistake, and we're going to get him and bring him here. It's a little bit of a risk because the nickel situation has really, really been a problem here. But I get it. I also get Gabe Davis. I do. I'm always weary. Somebody told me a long time ago, they said, when guys are in free agency, why are they there? Okay. So that doesn't necessarily mean a negative thing. Sometimes teams can't afford. Sometimes it's just they're shuffling their team around and they're changing the dynamic of their team and they're changing who they are. But I remember Gabe Davis being a big-time target, especially in one of the best games I've ever seen, Kansas City and Buffalo a few years back, that went into overtime. He was catching the ball down the seam and scoring touchdowns and making big plays, being a big target for Josh Allen. I do like it from that standpoint. He's the biggest wide receiver target. I think he's probably a little bit bigger than Evan Ingram, if you ask me. They may be sort of the same. Evan's about 6'2" in a piece. I think Gabe Davis is every bit of 6'3", and I really do like him as a player. But I liked him better when he was in Buffalo and he wasn't making a whole bunch of money. And I know that sounds bad. Shout out to Gabe and everybody else. I know that sounds bad because guys are going to get paid. But are the Jaguars going to be able to get the value out of him that Buffalo did? And Buffalo decided that they wanted to move on and move forward. And we got two Bills now. We got Gabe and we got Mitch. So we'll see if Buffalo, if they're, I wouldn't call them trash, but if what they took out is going to be the treasure for Jacksonville. It's just that wide receiver is a very deep position in this draft, right? And you can say, maybe they wouldn't have drafted him a wide receiver if they were able to re-sign. They signed Gabe Davis, and then they were trying to re-sign Calvin Ridley. If they got those two, then wide receiver would be totally off the table, in my opinion, on day one and day two. They needed a center. Eric Armstead, that's not even something that you work. They did need interior line help, but he's just such a good player. It doesn't matter, right? They needed a nickel corner, and they got Darnell Savage. It's not that they addressed positions that they didn't need upgrading. They did. Did they choose the right people? We'll see. Did they address things in free agency that they should have been addressing in the draft? And will that preclude them from drafting a really, really good player, but it doesn't make a lot of sense right now in the first round to grab a guy that's not going to be a starter for your team? I think the biggest head scratcher for me was the interior offensive line moves that they made outside of Mitch Morse. They extended Brandon Scherff, reworked his contract or whatever, and then they signed Ezra Cleveland to an extension. If those two guys are good enough, then everything will improve on that offensive line, because I think Mitch Morse is going to be a big time improvement at center. You can't help it, because I just believe they won't say it, but Luke Fortner is bad. He's just not good. He's just not good, right? And you just can't have your quarterback run for his life getting blown up, and you can't run the ball in short yardage because that kid ain't strong. I'm sorry. That's just the nature of the business, and it's the truth. But I do think there's a little bit of fear. I think because the players are guys that you like, that have been productive for the most part in their Devin Duvernay. He's a bigger version of Jamal Agnew. And my only issue with Jamal Agnew was he was always small, and sometimes When you're little like that, man, you drop the ball at inopportune times. And unfortunately, I can think about 3 or 4 games where if he doesn't fumble or drop a pass, or if he's a little bit taller and can reach some of those high balls when Trevor throws them on a lot of those wheel routes and stuff, they probably win more games. Then on the flip side, he was responsible for them winning some games because of what he did on the kicking game. And I get all of that, but he was also banged up a lot. So Duvernay, I get it. You can make sense out of each and every free agent that they picked up. You really can. You can make sense out of all of it. The thing is the player procurement doesn't start or stop in free agency. It also doesn't end with the first pick in the draft. The other part of it is those are two things that absolutely have to be tied together. Those things don't have to have their own identity. In fact, you can look at, well, free agency, we'll do what we can and then take best player available. Well, that might not be smart if best player available ends up falling and being a player that's at a premium position, one that you've already paid a whole bunch of money to 1 or 2 guys and committed other resources to, and now you're not going to be able to go out in free agency and do anything. So like adding Ronald Darby, they needed another corner. They lost Darius Williams. They needed a starting outside corner. Ronald Darby is a pro who the defensive back coach knows extremely. Chris Richards knows him very, very well. So the thing that I am worried about is, can they truly get best player available? Can they truly get best player available this year and have that guy make a tremendous impact? That's my key. I think that's what they have to do. You have to get production out of your first round picks. Doesn't mean they have to start. It just means that they have to be able to play and get production. So maybe be a part of a rotation. Iron sharpens iron. I get all of that, right? It's just that those things have to work together. And unless they are targeting a certain player, someone we don't know, and I brought the idea yesterday that they could draft an offensive lineman and then decide to move on from Cam Robinson. There was no rush to make a decision on Cam Robinson, and you don't have to telegraph that. Those are the type of things that come up in my mind when I sit here and I think and I wonder what they're doing. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt until I actually see what they do in the draft. But the draft and free agency definitely work hand in hand. That's why one guy's making a decision about both. You get with the player personnel department, the pro personnel, and then you get with player personnel and director of college scouting. You got to come up with a plan of procurement. How can you get guys? How can you get players? The key is to make sure that everybody you get works for the greater good and moves on. It can't be just to win enough games and make you good enough to get the pressure off your back. You can win another 10 games and then get more time to keep building. At some point, you can't hedge your bets anymore. At some point, you got to go him, and that's what we're going to build with, and we're going to live or die with those situations. And I don't know if the crew that they have down there are ready to do that right now. And this all goes back to this one thing, how they sat on their hands last year and acted like they had arrived. And it just gives this feels, how the young lady say it these days, it's giving overreaction, right? It's like, we ain't signed nobody last year, and this year we're going to go bonkers and sign a whole bunch of people. There's even some thought from some folks that they just needed to swing big. Get a deal done with Josh Allen, then franchise tag Calvin Ridley, then maybe go out and get Christian Wilkins. And I think when you do that, you might be done. You could probably have still gotten, maybe you could have still gotten Gabe Davis if you did it that way. It depends on how you structured the contracts, and then probably Ronald Darby. But then now you'd leave a glaring hole at nickel, and guess what? You could sit there at 17 and do. Draft a corner that long-term can play outside, but at least in the interim can line right up in that slot. And now you got a young guy, and you added high-end players, even though I do like Eric Armstead, and you're going to see why here in a second. I'm going to talk about his value. I'm going to try to do it without mentioning the mayor of Jacksonville. Talk about the value of Eric Armstead, and you'll hear from him on the Third and Long Title League podcast, talking about his contract and maybe why he felt a little bit disrespected and what you can probably hear in his voice that'll tell you what you'll be getting when he plays here in Jacksonville. I'll go over that in segment 3 on Locked On Jaguars. First, I got to let you know, though, if you're sick of watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and have to turn down the volume with all that screaming and shouting, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming and yelling. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You hear from Eric Armstead here, coming up in segment 3 here on Locked On Jaguars. Y'all trying to buy tickets to an event, to a game, you waited to the last minute? Man, don't fret, don't worry, because somebody is there to help you, and it is the Gametime app. That's right. Gametime is the absolute truth, and you shouldn't have to worry about when you buy tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Here's what you do, man. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON, one word, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, and it's all guaranteed. Third and final segment here on Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. We always thank you for making us your first listen. Eric Armstead, big 6'7", 290 some odd pound defensive lineman, because he can play anywhere. He can 2-gap, he can 3 technique, he can 5 technique, he can line up in the 4I, 4B, wherever you want him. He can move up and down the line. He sounds familiar, doesn't he? He also sounds familiar in another way, and that way is the way he speaks, the leadership qualities that he has, and how he goes about it. I'm going to play a little clip where he was talking about his contract situation in San Francisco, and I want to see if you can hear what I hear, and that is a really good, grounded football player who's going to be real good for the locker room, who's absolutely going to help the Jaguars with their versatility. Here's Eric Armstead from the Third and Long Title League podcast.
Felt like, I played well in the playoffs, had one of my best games, maybe my best game of my career in the Super Bowl. And I felt like, all was good. Like I felt like I did what I needed to do, and improve and show the type of player that I am, to my team, to the rest of the league, to everybody, to myself. And knowing what I knew going into the season, I knew that, I have a high cap hit going into the year. We have a bunch of amazing players on our team that deserve to get paid, and so I knew that. I knew that there was either going to be an extension talks or restructure or whatever to help the team with. In terms of the cap, because we're going to try to make another run at this, at the Super Bowl. And so I was fully aware and expecting that. And, I was trying to have those conversations. And, as the offseason progressed, they did notify me that they did want to extend me. They wanted me to be a Niner for life, remain on the team. But they didn't say what number that would be at, what the extension would be at.
So what eventually happened is they offered him a little bit of a deal that there's another clip where he kind of laughed it off, and then the Jaguars showed appreciation for his value with a 3-year, $51 million, something like that, a 3-year, $51 million deal with a bunch of money guaranteed. And I like the signing. The one thing I I will say is this. Trent Baalke has shown a propensity to really value other people more than retaining his own people. Um, it seems like the way Armstead is talking, that's almost kind of the way the way he's talking about the 49ers, if you just switch places and put the mic in front of Josh Allen's face, it would almost sound like Josh Allen was, hey man, I did everything I was supposed to do and I bet on myself and then they franchise tagged me again. And, I would really love to hear from Josh because that might give you an idea of exactly what I'm talking about, how they value a free agent from another team more than they value keeping their own guys. And here's where the problem is with that. Those guys are guys that you either picked or had choices over the last couple of years, whether or not you wanted them to be on the team. The Jaguars are just the organization that always makes decisions it's like some people may think they're being judicious, but I also think they're being scared in this light. They use all of their allotted time up to figure something out, and then they use the rules like the tags and all of that stuff at the last minute. They are never really, really like jump out the window proactive with their own guys. It's always, well, let's take everything all the way down until we don't have to do anything. Now the system's going to do it for us. And I just believe that at some point you have to start valuing your own people. You really do, because those are the folks that you chose. Those are the folks that have been in your building. It is the culture that you have set. It's the culture that has been set by people that you picked. And you can't always just go out and think that you can go get somebody else's players and inject them into your team. And all of a sudden you're going to fix an element in your DNA that you don't have, that you're supposed to have, because you're the one responsible for creating the atmosphere for your team. So I think it's going to work out. I do think they're playing, they're still doing things like they're scared. It comes across as if they're being aggressive, and it's good because fans are going to be optimistic about it. We're going to have to see how it works out. And they are a 9-win team, and they're trying to add talent to a 9-win team, and they have a very young quarterback who I believe is capable of being very, very good. The issue for me is, though, if you're going to win it all, you have to have your finger on the pulse of the team, and you have to know before we know, and you have to act before you run out of time. And that's the problem that I have with Jacksonville. We'll see if trusting vets over youth is a sign that they don't believe that they're good at picking young players beyond the first round. So a lot to think about and go over, but we got a lot of time to see if it works out. We'll see what happens in the NFL draft. We'll have more talk about the draft as we continue to lead up to it. We'll hit you with another podcast tomorrow. Until then, you guys take care of yourself, and thank you for joining me again on Locked On Jaguars.